Thank you, Viel. I should just say that since the founding of our office in '89, just Matthias Sauerbruch and myself, and then moving to Berlin, we now have 2 additional partners, Jens Ludloff and Juan Lucas Young, 2 associates, Andrew Kiel and Jürgen Bartenschlag, and a whole team of fantastic architects and support in our office. So don't see this as all too personal. It's teamwork. Today, actually, I'm just going to talk about one project. I assume that most of the audience is students, except for a colleague I see here in the front. And I just think it's more useful for students to see something in depth than a lot of things in less depth. Do ask questions, otherwise I'll get the feeling you've all been asleep during the lecture. The project I want to talk about is the Federal Environmental Agency in Dessau. In '92, some words I know better in German, so sorry about that. In '92, the Föderalismuskommission of the government in Germany was looking for potential sites for the agency of the environmental ministry, and they decided in the end that Dessau was a good site, and they eventually chose the actual site, which I'll show you in a minute. And they made a competition for this building, which was quite a substantial building for 800 full-time work areas and quite a lot of public areas, such as an auditorium, a very large library, which would be, or is now, the largest environmental library in Europe, a cafeteria, an information and exhibition area. So these were to be integrated within the building, as well as obviously all the many workplaces. So the competition, is there a pointer or not? Or I can just point. Here it is. Thank you. I'm not very used, I hope I don't, I'm not very used to being so anamorphically related to the screen, but shall I maybe go over there? No, then I can't press the computer. I'll stay here. I'll stay here. So it's all very blurred from here, but I presume it's relatively in focus for most of you. So for those of you who know Dessau, you've probably already picked out the, is this in reverse? No, it's not. Train station. Our site is up here, and the Bauhaus is down here, but it looks slightly different to normal. Anyway, the Bauhaus, or maybe it's off, here it is, sorry. Here's the Bauhaus. Phew, that's the main route from the train station. Bauhaus down here, and our site is up here, which you'll see obviously in detail in a minute. This is the main train station coming in this direction from Berlin, the main station being here. And the center of the city is over here. And the fact that the site is so close to the train station was obviously noted by journalists and critics straight away, in this, knowing that a lot of people would still live in Berlin when the new agency was opened, which is partly the case. A lot of people have moved to Dessau. But in fact, the reason it's on this particular site is not only because it's close to the railway station for commuters, but more importantly, because it's a site that's on the one of the former industrial areas in Dessau. In English, you say a brownfield site. And in fact, this area had been settled, first of all, in the late, well, sort of 1855, with industry relating to the gas district. It's called the Gasviertel in Germany. And our site is now sort of mostly on the left of this image. You can probably see the beginning of a gas containers. It was a whole sort of gas district, and many of the buildings and the jobs there were related to the firm Junkers, which not only made aeroplanes, but also made gas appliances and things like that. The last factory was closed in the early 90s, and in fact the city authorities pulled down a lot of these buildings prior to the decision of the Föderalismuskommission. So it was a slight pity that a lot of them had already gone. However, this is a little building called Wörlitzer Bahnhof, or the Wörlitz train station. And this building is one which did remain on site and which we were to use within the whole new ensemble. Here you have the actual site. So that's the one I just pointed out, the former railway station of the Wörlitzer Bahnhof. And this is actually a bit of a double drawing. On the right-hand side of this drawing is the building that we were to use. And on the left-hand side of that black area is one that actually had been knocked down. It's a rather strange site. So the train station, the main station, is over here. And it has actually very little street frontage. This is a street called Unruhstraße. And the main sort of entrance to the site from the main station is going to be in this corner. This is the line of a future street called, imaginatively, Planstraße. And there are some streets here on the other diagonal of the site. But basically what we found quite weird was this substantial building for 800 people going to be sort of diagonally through the center of a block. This has a few sheds here, but it wasn't owned by the government for the building, so this will be developed later by somebody. And these buildings are sort of relics of the industrial architecture. Some of them are quite nice, like this building, which is facing on to the railway land, and it's quite nice solid brick architecture. And then these buildings are all kind of 19th century Gründerzeit architecture of Dessau. So we felt it was strange that there wasn't much sort of address, as it were, for the building, not much of a public face, almost the opposite, that the bulk of the site is lying on the interior of the site. So here you have that actual corner, so that's the little train station, that's Unruhstraße, that's the building that we're going to use. That's at the back of the site, those Gründerzeit buildings that are just off our site. And then you can probably see that's a little station here. This building had to come down. We thought we could reuse it for the canteen, but it was in too bad condition. So what we saw when we went to the site is more or less this. This is the remains of the tracks which led from the Wörlitzer Bahnhof to the Wörlitzer Garten. And here you can see those sort of industrial architecture and a bit of sort of sheds and things, which were later cleared. And literally the platform building here of the Wörlitzer Bahnhof. With regard to the Wörlitzer Bahnhof, and indeed these tracks on the diagonal through the site, and actually these trees and further trees which were found by us to the north of the site, beyond the boundaries of the site, we quite liked both the literal diagonal of the train tracks, but also the fact that off the site there were trees that had grown up around the train tracks, because this train is no longer running to the garden. It was the station and the train tracks were set to bring the public to this landscape garden. And now you can actually still go there by train, but from the main station. But we liked the ideals of the landscape garden itself, which was in fact one of the first, or the first, English landscape garden in Germany. So, and the Prince Franz from Anhalt, Saxon-Anhalt, who was very much a figure of the Enlightenment and had a lot of agricultural reforms, as well as his ideas in arts and the aesthetics, really created the most fantastic place there. And we liked the idea that these tracks, which once were bringing people from the city into the countryside, now by default, with their being out of use, the countryside is coming back into the city. So that was kind of a clue for us for the beginning of the ideas of the building. This is just a plan of the Garden of Wörlitz showing many views and axes and the use of water. Basically, most of you, I'm sure, know the English landscape garden, but the main idea was really one of genius loci, the one of using the qualities of the place and not imposing an order from outside on it, but trying to extract the natural qualities and work with them and further them. And indeed, I think that's what we do with a lot of our architecture. Well, that's what we aim to do. And this is literally then taken from the garden. So it's the idea of Arcadia. And so the site is blank at the moment on this drawing, so what you see is the area of trees around the old train tracks, which were now out of use. So it's sort of a park by default had grown up. And we saw the area in front of the train station as park-like. and wanted to connect them, and in fact make a public park through the site. And this was our first and main move, and it remains so. And it meant that then the area we then had left to put the building on was obviously less, but nevertheless we went ahead and followed this through in all its consequences. So this is just a few of the many models that were made looking at the formal studies of the building, which ended up something like this on the right. And if you take the brief, which is literally for 800, well, more or less for 800 cellular offices, this is Germany, and everyone in the government or in these sort of agencies has to have their 12.4 square meters, more than in England, actually. And then if you put that over 4 floors, which was the height limit for the building in this part of town, with which we agreed, and put at regular and necessary intervals the fire escapes, you'd end up with an extremely long building. The fairly obvious move is to double that in on itself and create an atrium which can help with obviously keeping the building warmer and having a smaller amount of surface area and with access. And then with regard to the public program of the brief, the public nature of the building, we wanted to create a very definite zone that was public, and in fact an address for the building that was very public before one went into the more private working areas. So one can quite easily change the diagram into this. And then you have to remember our actual site and the shape of it, and basically this idealized form, if you like, became something like this when we put it on the site. In fact, this drawing is taken from shortly after the competition, when we did not have an intermediate building between what we were to call the snake and the library. So in fact, it's not quite an up-to-date sketch, but the idea is there enough. And there you see it on the site. So in fact, now you see there's a bigger area of black there, so that's got a new intermediate building that I'll explain. And on this sketch, we quite deliberately put the green of the public park into the forum, which is a public space, and in terms of idea is continuing the space of the park into the building. And also covered over what is actually a little canteen building, which is meant to sit like a pavilion in the park, as is indeed the auditorium, again recalling the landscape garden where individual pavilions are set in the landscape with a particular visual relationship to each other, not necessarily geometrical. So one can approach the building either along a path from the rear, from Humperdinckstrasse, or from the main station this way, or you can go the other side of the train station this way. We were working with landscape architects based in Berlin, ST Raum A, and they very much continued the ideas that we'd set up in the competition, indeed with them, which is this continuation of the park inside the building. And in the forum itself, again, there's more greenery, but here it's slightly more of an exotic nature, is not so much the literal landscape of Dessau, which is coming in. And there you see it in relation to the town. So it is, as you see, I mean, it is a very, very large structure on plan, of which we were well aware. And in doing all of this sort of bending of the form, I mean, I explained it to you in a very rational way, but obviously there are many criteria involved at the same time, artistic as well. And in fact, what we were very keen to do was to create a building that you couldn't see all at once. So that notwithstanding the fact that it's rather huge, particularly when you see it from a helicopter, I've got a photo later to show you, but basically when you're on the ground, you would only, from here, for example, you'd only see that crank of the building, you wouldn't see this one because it's cranked out of your perspective. Or from here, you only see that, and you think it could just be a corner building, etc. At the moment, you can see this whole rear facade, well, I call it the rear, well, it's on the east. But in fact, when this site is developed, that's just a sketch by us, but when this is developed, the building will disappear and reappear, which I much prefer to, at the moment, where it looks incredibly like the model that we built, where you can see it all at once. So that was just to remind me to tell you of this sort of visual relationship in the city that we wanted to achieve. And now I just run through a couple of slides combined with very early sketch perspectives that we made in terms of the spatial sequence of the building. So this is approaching actually just on the north of the Wörlitzer Bahnhof, the Wörlitz train station, where we a couple of years earlier had added a missing wing. On the other side it has a small brick wing, and here it did have one which was bombed out, and we were asked to do a little extension which is an exhibition area for the building. This is the building that we reuse in the library, and one can walk through here. Here you can see the platform again of the station. And then, well, from here you can already see the building, and as you turn the corner, this was the sketch perspective, but that's then looking into the forum, the main entrance area with the auditorium and a pond in the foreground. Which it looks very anamorphic. I hope it looks better from your end. Anyway, so you see the public area of the building quite soon after you approach, and then this part of the building, as I pointed out, is you don't see the whole length. You only see part of it as it's going north towards the northern boundary and coming closer into the forum. Sorry, some of these are building site photographs. And this is once you're in the forum, which, as I said, the intention, well, it is a public space, and the intention is that it feels very exterior. It's got a huge glass roof. It has the same stone material inside and outside, and a couple of trees. It's obviously a slightly different temperature, but it's not fully heated in here, so you still have your coat on most of the time. And it's really a transitional space between the park and the working area itself. We were very keen that the working area of what we call the atrium of the building is very visible to members of the public, who obviously won't be able to go in unless you have an appointment because there are security barriers here. But nevertheless, that the whole thing isn't hidden, as are many of the agencies. I'm sorry that one or two of these are building site photographs. We haven't yet managed to retake them at the same angle. So that's just a little information pavilion of the porter when you come in. And here is looking through a slightly different angle, but you can see all the way through to the depth of the atrium. And the atrium itself, this was the sketch at the time of the competition, where we have bridges connecting across the floors, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But in fact, spatially, it really hasn't changed very much. I think it's quite satisfying when one can realize the idea as it was in the competition. So this is a ground floor plan, and what you also see on the ground floor are various other elements that are poking out into the space of the atrium. These we call the Kieselsteine, or the stones, and the purpose of these is to break up the floor plan, again, a bit with elements that we see as part of the family of these pavilions, and they're used for storage and non-full-time work areas. So they literally are kind of they're concrete with a very white finish, so they're quite stone-like. And it was very much part of the kind of landscape idea that we should have those there. You can see one. They do have windows. And this is in the atrium itself with the bridges, which are obviously not exactly as in the competition, but the idea has stayed. Or from here, the space of the atrium is, because of the strange shape on plan, it's always changing as you progress through it. So again, you never see even the whole of the atrium at once. And in fact, this image I put to remind me when the building was finished last year in May 2005, and in summer 2004, it was used for the Day of Architecture, where they always open with a building site that's nearly finished. And they chose our building, which was quite nice. The BDA, I think, organises it. And what really pleased me was talking to some of the people of Dessau who had seen this building being on site for 3 years. They came in, because it was a Saturday morning, so they came with their dogs, as one does on a Saturday, and they were amazed at the size of the building from inside. So it's kind of like a TARDIS from Doctor Who. And that pleased me, that somehow the idea had worked, that one doesn't see the whole thing at once. This is a diagram just to show the circulation. So one's either coming from the station or from the streets to the north, and then into the forum area, which is a main collection. And then it's really seen like the roots of a tree and the tree with branches up. So the bridges form the main circulation for the Here you can see a sketch of that in three-dimensional form on the models. That we made this model really to work out what to do with the areas which we called the bridgeheads at the ends of the bridges, because we knew that we'd obviously have a lot of interior facade for approximately half of the 800 offices, so about 400 offices here. And the brief was very, very tight in terms of the square meters, and the money was tight. It needed to be a very economical building. And we realized that we could only create small areas of generosity occasionally in the building, so we decided to gather these together and concentrate them all at the bridgeheads, and also use that as a way of orientation and changing the colours of the facade at this point, so making it quite clear. In terms of organisation, these are the floors one above the others, so ground 1, 2, 3. What you'll see is this blue department is kind of repeats vertically. So the idea is that the receptions for the various departments are located at the bridgeheads, and then it gives the flexibility of, for example, this green department and the blue department. If one is shrinking and the other is expanding, it really doesn't matter. They just have to change the names on the doors. Because organizations like this are always reinventing themselves and changing the size of their departments. So we tried to find a system for the building that would not be too fixed. This is a model showing that idea of the bridgeheads, where we have large areas of color to break up the monotony of the interior facades. And each of these is treated with a different family of colors. I won't go into detail on this. The offices themselves, as I said, are 12.4 square meters. It looks even smaller from here. But this was just as the people are moving in. And obviously half of them are looking out into Dessau and half of them are looking in. And again, one positive report that came back from the users, well, now if you go and visit the building, well, obviously the furniture is all in and all their stuff, but it's also completely full of teddy bears and plants, and they've very much appropriated the building, which is quite enjoyable. But the more enjoyable thing is that the users have, well, when we were planning the building and all the discussions with the client, it was sort of seen as a disadvantage to have your office on the atrium, and it was thought that everybody would want their office towards the exterior. But in fact, we found out from the inhabitants and the users of the building that they much prefer to be on the atrium side, and then they look across to other people or look across to the bridges or see what they see as their own building, which is great. So they really identify with it and want to see it. What you may notice here, which is I'll talk when I come on to the exterior facade, is that the facade is sort of timber. Well, it's timber, which I'll come on to, but that it stretches across the width of the room completely. And this is a special panel which opens for night ventilation, which I'll come on to later. And exposed concrete ceilings. Here it's not concrete colour because it has a kind of lime wash on it, but it's useful for the thermal mass. And here, this is not taken from an office, but it's from one of the meeting areas, but it shows the feeling of the space looking across the atrium when you're looking through the interior facade. And although this is printed glass, it's relatively transparent so that one can also look through. This shows that idea of the bridgeheads and where the lifts are coming and where the meeting rooms and areas are at the 3 points. Now I just want to talk about 3 particular areas: the library, the auditorium, and the canteen. The library, basically we knew that we could reuse this building, which we use for what we call the magazine, or the storage of many books rather densely arranged. And we still needed additional area, so we put a building in between, if you like, in between our snake, so that's a section through the snake, and the old building. And this was obviously deliberately rising up above it to have a kind of particular attitude towards the old building and to bring light in from the top, and also to maintain natural ventilation and smoke exhaust. And in fact, this part of the building is also relatively densely occupied now with stacks, as you can see. And then there's even a sort of a large shadow gap, if you like, of a sort of in-between bit between our building, the Snake, and the new hall of the library. Here it is under construction. So you can see that's the bit that rises up. We used brickwork at 3 points in the building. One was the extension to the Wörlitzer Bahnhof, where we used it vertically. And here we made a kind of texture to catch the light in the brickwork. This has got a west light coming on it. And the other place we used it, I don't have a photograph of that, but that's the wall behind the canteen, where it's also used in a different way. This is a model just to show the difference between the stacked area in the old building and then how the space is working in the new part. There was a bit of a story with this wall, which, as you can see on this drawing, so this is the northern wall of the old building. And here you can see it shown in concrete, but in fact it was a brick building. And the intention is obviously to keep the brick building. But in fact, the building had been so messed around with during its lifetime as an industrial building, many new openings put in, et cetera, is that when once we got to site and work was started on the building, it was clear that it wasn't strong enough to take any additional support. So in fact, that wall, the northern wall, had to be demolished. We were quite sad about this conceptually. Well, I mean, yeah, and realised that we couldn't rebuild the brick wall because that would seem too silly, because one wouldn't do it these days. The normal method would be, or the most straightforward method for a building that is an economical building, would be to use concrete. So we decided to replace it with a concrete wall, but nevertheless, out of reasons, I suppose, more than sentimental, what we did is we sort of made a three-dimensional tracing, let's say, of the old wall, and then made that as an imprint in the new one. So we kept all the openings as they had been, and all the strange recesses or projections of lintels, etc. And so the thing is a sort of three-dimensional memory of the brick wall. So there you can see the concrete and the stair going up, and these are various reading balconies into the main space. This is that other wall, the southern wall, which has fixed louvers because it's always getting sun, and you can see the library very densely packed. And these are some of those little reading areas. We also have cabins on the east and west facade for reading small carols. The auditorium, as you saw from the exterior, is sort of positioned halfway with respect to the exterior glazing into the forum. We wanted it to be very obvious from the outside where this part of the building is, and yet obviously for reasons of weather protection, reasons of economy and planning, so you can use the same coat check and toilets as the main auditorium. We have the entrance into this building from the foyer, and the foyer can be used as the foyer for the auditorium at the same time. So here it is from the outside just before completion. Again, in concrete, so it's part of that family of concrete objects. And here within the foyer, then this is leading you into the entrance for the auditorium. And then once within inside the auditorium, it's all lined in timber. I think it seats about 300. And the canteen, in idea, as I mentioned, it's a little pavilion within the landscape. Obviously, the pavilion needs a kitchen, which is usually bigger than the pavilion itself. So we decided to use an existing wall on the site and extend it. This is the brick wall. And because the new street, the Planstrasse, is coming here, we use this as a kind of noise buffer to protect the park and the canteen from the noise. And there's a small pond here whose water we use to reflect light onto the ceiling. I'm afraid I don't have any good photographs of this space. That's under construction, obviously. Well, making a building for the agency of the Ministry of the Environment, it had to be greener than green. And I don't want to go into these aspects in detail. We had anyway already been very consciously designing buildings that are energy efficient. But for us, what's more important is sustainability on a wider level, sustainability within the city, the reuse of sites, and also sustainability on the level of the individual, making spaces that are enjoyable and sustain the well-being of the individual. We believe that you can't reduce sustainability to numbers and quantifiable aspects. We did, however, have to do that for the client through many meetings. What I'll do, or maybe I don't know how interested you are in the, but there are fairly obvious things like the passive aspect of the building, in the sense that we have the atrium, so the building has a relatively minimal exterior, a compactness, which means that there's not a lot of energy lost through the skin, and the building is very well insulated and it's well sealed, and we use a heat exchanger. The main aspect, which I'll go into in a bit more detail, is that's unusual on the building, is the geothermal heat exchanger, which is a system of pipes in the ground of about 5 kilometers in length, which I think is the largest in Europe, which is used to temper the air. So in winter, it'll make the air that's received inside the building warmer than the external air, and in summer cooler. And it is a very kind of low-tech way of doing it, because you're using the free stability of temperature, if you like, in the ground. Other aspects are fairly kind of obvious, like using reflection from the ceiling and sun shading on the roof to take the heat off, and louver blinds in the windows, etc. We use some solar collectors to create cooling, in fact, for the computers. And there's an area of photovoltaics in the entrance hall. That's more as it's used for demonstration purposes. And the fact that the plan is very thin is obviously helping to reduce the amount of light and energy that's needed. And the facades also are relatively minimal in their use of glass. On the exterior facade, I think, in fact, it's only 35% of the area. On the interior, we could go up to 60 because, of course, it's a second skin. We're protected by the glass roof. And we use gas from a landfill site. There are green roofs. And also, all the building materials were chosen on account of their low embodied energy, etc., etc. I won't go into the science of this. But one of the main aspects, as you saw in terms of the planning, is the atrium and the forum, which we obviously, in terms of the sustainability of the building, but we obviously turn into one of the main, or the main architectural feature of the building is this continuous folded glass roof, which indeed folds down to form the entrance. In terms of noise, we had to make the facade on the west of the building able to withstand the future noise source of, well, the present trains and the future road. That was quite a strong factor in determining the design. And as I mentioned, the labyrinth in the ground, in this case, is taking the warmer air of summer and cooling it through the many kilometers. What happens is the air comes into the building, and through 5 heat exchangers in the, sorry, not heat exchangers, air handling units in the basement, and it's then fed up into the various office floors, and it's taken into the offices, and then when it is coming out warmer, it goes into it's either going directly out into the atrium and then out through the roof of the atrium, or it's being collected and then the heat is exchanged in the winter and extracted in a different method. This is an engineer's drawing just showing the 5 kilometers of pipes in the ground, which were literally using up the whole of the rest of the ground. And in fact, the ground, I mentioned it was contaminated land, so the fact that that ground had to be excavated anyway, so it wasn't like an extra effort. And there you can see these are the large pipes that a person can go in for maintenance, and these are the very small ones. And in terms of the intake of the air, you saw just on the diagram before there were pipes sticking up from the ground. Obviously, there were public art projects for this building. And I think one of the most successful were the suggestion by Hans-Joachim Hertel, who suggested making sort of coats, if you like, for the 5 intake areas. And he made them all out of Corten steel, and we think they're very beautiful. It's very nice. It's a sequence. They're all slightly different shapes, and they make pieces in that landscape stretch going up the building. Now, I'll just say a little bit about the facades. It took us a long time to develop the ideas, particularly for the external facade. Once we'd got that, the internal seemed more obvious to us. But we were looking a lot at different materials and recycling and how to work with smaller areas of glass, and made many, many models, of which these are only just a few. Or bringing in light, particularly at high level, etc. And at one point, we did have thermal flues within the building, but this, as you can see also on this model, but that didn't go through into the final design. In fact, this model more or less represents the final design, which is to have timber spandrel panels on the building, and what became coloured glass areas with quite deep, well, relatively deep reveals of about 35 centimeters in color as well. We didn't keep this banding of the building into a lower half and an upper half. The reason we were keen to use the depth of the facade in its architectural and aesthetic resolution is that one's nearly always coming across the building in an anamorphic way, or let's say approaching it from the side, like as I am now, rather than head on. It's not a building that has a main facade like a classical building. And we therefore wanted to use the depth inherent in the side view, as you can see here. In fact, to create a building with such long timber facades was also quite unusual. I think in Sachsen-Anhalt, it's meant to be 2.5 stories maximum for a timber building, so we had to get special permission. Otherwise, it would need to have been sprinklered, which obviously would have been ridiculous to have put sprinklers around such a long, large facade. So it's large. And this is just a construction shot. I just wanted to, it's very, very basic concrete construction, and the facade is also brought, obviously, in elements, as most facades are these days, onto the building. And it was a very, very simple construction, where the construction of the panels is also of timber. And we enjoyed the fact that although the building has quite, many different curves and a sort of rather challenging geometry, and the windows aren't all one above the other, because of the computer and the use of mass customization, one could use such a low-tech material as timber in combination with today's production and delivery methods and have a sort of perfect facade delivered and built very fast in the low-tech material of timber. There you see just the sample facade, the mock-up that was built. Here you can see the reveals. So on some of the reveals, they're actually made of metal louvers, taking air in for night ventilation, which we use to cool down the building in the summer, making use of the concrete soffits and the high thermal mass of the building. And you'll see that on this window, that will be a night ventilation shaft. There'll be metal louvers there. And we also enjoy the reflective surface of the glass, bringing Dessau, if you like, back onto the building. That's one of those night ventilation openings seen from the inside. It's very kind of low-tech, just opens. On the interior facade, we continued the theme of a timber spandrel area and a glass band, and that glass band modulated, if you like, with coloured strips. In fact, the heights of the bands are different. It could be lower because we could have taller windows. And in fact, when you stand in the forum, you can see the two facades coming together. That's an exterior facade coming in from the outside, and the interior facade continues at low level into the forum. It's another view of the same. Or those the glass panels that are see-through. And the same shot again. I took this photo, as you can see, quite near the end of the job. And the reason I took the photo is because I thought that this was a joke, but apparently it's not, which is this bit. So here the Bundesrepublik of Deutschland is building a new building for the Umweltbundesamt in Dessau. And the Bundesrepublik is vertreten durch the Bundesministerium für Verkehr, Bau und Wohnungswesen, and they are vertreten durch die Oberfinanzdirektion in Magdeburg, die ÖFD, and they in turn are vertreten letztendlich vertreten durch das Staatshochbauamt Dessau. And I thought that was a joke, sort of, English humor, but apparently it's not. It's dead serious. But it's this sort of necessity of being one person or one organization being represented by another, and the sort of hierarchical chain of responsibility and relationships really got us down. And it led to drawings such as this, which were not produced by us, you might guess. So this is a graph which was made for a discussion that was held. I mean, obviously many, many meetings on this building on all aspects, particularly all the sustainable aspects, because when you're building for the environmental agency, they know everything better than you do, which is kind of annoying. So this one, for example, is measuring the difference in a timber facade or a Wärme dem Verbundsystem facade, which is, for those of you who don't speak German, if there are any, probably aren't, is this horrible plaster that you can tap and it's hollow. Which was variation 2.4. So it's measuring the difference between these two facades in terms of ecology, economy, and the social cultural. And my partner Matthias, I think, was at this meeting together with Lucas Young, our partner responsible for the project, and they luckily were able to convince the client that this the red marks for the timber facade could just beat on ecology, definitely beat on social, cultural, and unfortunately slightly more expensive. But somehow the weight of it, they managed to prove that it was worth it to have a timber facade. But basically everything was analysed to bits and quantified. And although, I mean, obviously in terms of being responsible with taxpayers' money, ultimately one has to take a stand. But on the other hand, we think buildings have many other aspects than those that can be quantified by technocrats. On the same note, actually, this is actually a spear diagram, which is a sort of trademark of Arup, and we didn't work with Arup on this building, and we do work with them on many buildings. And I'm putting up this diagram not to criticize Arup. or not really to criticize engineers, but just to say that it is difficult once you try and measure everything. I mean, literally quantify it rather than say, well, it's good for this or good for that. And as architects, one takes a total responsibility, which is to produce a building for the client, for the city, for future generations. And I think that at the moment, the tendency to try and split the profession up is somehow symptomatic of all of this measuring and cutting up the responsibility. And I think we as architects have to fight this and try to retain control, and also obviously artistic control is the main thing of the building, nevertheless answering to each of the areas that need to be investigated in quantitative terms, but nevertheless the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we had similar types of discussions, although they weren't so bad, when we did the GSW building, again, with all of the kind of environmental aspects, which are great on the building, and I still totally support them, and it is totally integral to the building. But nevertheless, in the end, it's that the building has an aura and atmosphere, and this is has to come across too. So back to Dessau. Here, just a couple of words on colour, not too many. So this is the idea, that main idea, the urban idea of the park coming through. And the building facade, we did the timber and the stripes the whole way through the building, all the way. I suppose one could have, but because I said one of our other urban intentions was to break the building down, I suppose you could have said maybe formally we should have either sort of made the building have more recesses and setbacks or something to make it look more like a group of buildings, I suppose like the Rossi building at Zimmerstrasse, which we decided not to do for reasons of, I suppose, a sort of legacy of the modern movement. Also, in terms of colour treatment, we then decided to try to use the colour to moderate the building and put different accents on the various parts to give the various parts of the building their own identity. And what we decided to do is, in general, put the sort of greeny, blue, more natural colours on the natural side of the building. Let's say the side that's stretching along the park, and the side that's stretching along the city side and up against the dark red of the library, we then put the more artificial colours of pinks and reds and oranges. That was the basic principle. And in fact, what we did is we put each colour group has about 7 colours in it, and then at the curves between the colours, we make a sort of weaving or verflechtung between the families. But that was the idea as drawn. You can see it here a bit on the model. Or on the photos. So here you can see the reds up against the reds of the library and the greens and blues in the more natural area. And those, you can see the trees of the park that has grown up around the railway tracks to the north. Well, you have to decide for yourself if you think it works. And on the back, this is what I said, at the moment you do get this view, which is a bit weird. So that's the model, and that's the building, and it's sort of just the same. So I'm actually longing for all of these sheds to be developed, so the building gets hidden, and then it will reappear again. At the moment, you see it a bit too much. And that's one of my favorite areas where the greens and the pinks come together. And this is sort of part of that process. Actually, that's when we even had a square end to the building. More part of the process. It was very useful, actually, to develop the colours on this big model. It's about a 5-metre long model that we made for the Venice Biennale about nearly 3 years ago, because one could just move them around. It's much easier than on drawings. And again, all the various kind of colour samples and things. We worked with a fantastic glass company called BGT in southern Germany, who I think we used 4 colours out of 36, and they created the rest for us. And they were very, very patient. And we would try to creatively use their mistakes. The ones that went wrong, we'd put it into another group, because it could be nice in another group. And obviously glass has a green colour to it. even if you use the so-called white glass. So it's always difficult to go from the drawing, which is difficult anyway because it's made by a computer, and it depends how it prints out. But to get from here to the actual glass was quite a journey. And just to summarize, and now it hasn't been a hugely long lecture, so I hope there'll be questions. But so here's the Bauhaus, obviously taken from the air, obviously quite soon after it was completed, because there's not much else around it. And ditto for our building before the landscape's really grown up. And in terms of image, let's say, like this, they're completely seem to be completely polar opposites. I mean, one is very stark and of a cubist composition and in great contrast to nature, and this is and white, and this is soft and bending and integrating nature and colored. So on first level, they seem totally, totally different. And yet, in terms of idea and ideal, we see them actually as not so far apart. First of all, there's the aspect of the integrated planning team. I mean, the Bauhaus was built within 2 years with a very tight schedule and a completely integrated team. Our building took, unfortunately, much longer, but we did have a very integrated team of engineers and architects and landscape working together on it. And secondly, we think that the aim of the Bauhaus to confront reality with sort of the qualities and sensibilities of art to be a very valid one. And that's what I was mentioning before about this, trying to build a kind of resistance to the quantification of every aspect of architecture by the client and some engineers. So that aspect we see is very similar. And again, Gropius would make a point that that buildings should use should exploit the good aspects of machines and not succumb to the bad ones. And I think now, in this age, kind of 60 years or 70 years later, it becomes possible with computer processes to retain artistic ideals and still produce buildings that have great individuality using the computer and mass customization. We feel, I mean, in terms of sustainability, one could, you could say this west facade of the Bauhaus is ridiculous because it's not particularly sustainable. And on one level, well, it is obviously not sustainable, and ideas and ideals have changed since it was built. But in terms of, that's the measurable sustainability of science. But in terms of real sustainability, I think it is pretty sustainable. I mean, after all, the city calls itself Bauhausstadt. And so the city is clinging on to the aura, if you like, the atmosphere of this building as part of its marketing and its image, which is, I think, very good and is obviously the way forward at the moment for the city. And we feel, therefore, that the building is continuing the ideals from the Bauhaus to unite art and the brief into a whole, which we hope is going to act as a catalyst to reinvigorate the particular area of the city. But we would very much see the building as a continuation of the ideals, although the form is totally different. Thank you.
Maybe some people have some questions about this, I think, fantastic lecture. I would have at least one.
Okay.
And maybe two. One question is what I didn't get, but maybe I wasn't listening carefully. When you explained the building in the beginning, the inner court was, as far as I understood, not an inside area from the beginning? Was it something which came in the process? Because you you showed us actually the, let's say, the line which you bended.
Yeah.
And then I didn't get the point where the inner court became part of the project.
No, it was actually, that was just the morphology drawing is just to try to explain the reason of why the building is the weird shape that it is.
And
but the atrium...
And why it has the...
yes, but the atrium was there right at the competition stage.
Okay,
And
why?
Why?
Yes.
To create the main circulation space for the building, a place for people to meet, hang out. People say now they're in the building that they're talking to people who they've been working next door to 20 years in the old building but haven't really spoken to them. So apparently it is really working socially. So for me the main reason is social. And then you can tack on to that the scientific, the sort of, loss of, reduced loss of energy, etc. in terms of the heat. But I think the main thing is the social space and literally how to reach the main circulation through the bridges and the lifts and the stairs. So most people use the stairs on the bridges rather than the stairs in the building, but it's really a social space.
A second question
Yeah.
I have is that,
gives you time to think up your questions.
Yeah, but it's really something which, since you are not born in Germany, I think, and I'm not
Correct.
born in Holland. I'm not born in Germany, but I am born in Holland. Is that the lecture, a lot of the lecture, you start explaining about the physics of the building climate, all the sustainability and so on. Do you think that debate about those issues was it positive or negative for the process of the design? So what I'm trying to ask is, all the debates you had, were they helping you to develop the building, or was that, I think for the students it's quite an important issue, or was that something which you had to fight for, and you would say, when I would have built a building with the same concept in France or in England or in Belgium, it would have been a different building?
I think in the end it all helped. If you talk to Lucas, he might say something else, because he went to all those meetings. I didn't go to all those meetings. There was one point where the atrium had to be measured. And like the capital cost of the atrium as regards then, luckily, in fact, in terms of amortization of the building, we were allowed 60 years in general. But I mean, I think they did 10 years maintenance cost and the capital cost and everything. And it sort of just came out kind of just okay. But even the atrium, which to us architects seems such an obvious thing. I mean, you sort of don't question it. When that gets questioned by people who are paying for the building, or who look at all the insulation, the fact that the then interior facade doesn't need so much insulation, but then you have to pay for this huge roof. I mean, they really look at it sort of purely scientifically and not spatially, or not in terms of the aura or atmosphere. I find it quite extraordinary.
Is that a German thing?
I think it's pretty German, actually. Yeah? I don't know. I mean, I haven't built a big building in England, so I don't know how bad it can get there. But I mean, it was pretty, that aspect, the atrium being questioned, was, you kind of felt the carpet being pulled under your feet, from under your feet, because as architects you put so much passion and love and time and money and energy into making the building, and then when people start questioning what to us seems such an obvious positive factor of it, it's quite weird. You have to be really tough. Toughen up.
Are you tough?
I don't know.
Are there maybe other questions?
Yeah. Just following a similar line of questioning, I guess, but because of the brief, the sustainability aspect was probably pushed quite strongly from the beginning. In your approach and conceptual development, at what stage did you start taking in those sustainable considerations of the design?
Well, actually, right from the competition stage. They did develop and change for various reasons, but right from the competition stage, we had quite a serious submission in terms of sustainability. And in fact, it was an open competition, and there were nearly 300 entries. And I heard that and then there was a short list, and then we got to work on it again, which was very helpful. About 30 schemes, I think, I can't remember, or 15. 30 or 15 went through. But apparently even all of those on the shortlist hadn't fulfilled the brief in terms of the sustainable things. But it was incredibly difficult at the competition stage to try and do all of that because you're doing everything at once, as usual. But I mean, you have only 8 weeks or something. But for us, it was an integral part from the beginning.
But in terms of this conceptual development, like when you were working out what you wanted from the building, was it, at what point were you kind of addressing, I guess, the sustainability issues and what point were you letting the concept?
Well, things like, I mean, the atrium is an obvious one because that's part of the form. And so that was, knowing, that's a fairly obvious passive response that's sustainable. I suppose things like, well, in terms of working out all the ventilation and the air routes and the fact of being able to use the heat exchanger in the earth, that, I can't remember if we had the heat exchanger at the competition actually, but that was obviously, that's a much more involved thing and maybe less visible architecturally, because you're maybe thinking about the visible architecture. But actually that's why we like the pipes in the garden, because it makes it visible. It makes the sort of workings of the building obvious and almost didactic. I still haven't probably answered your question. But it's sort of like you just do it all at once. Try not to forget it, you try and do it all.
Coming back to the fluffier or passionate, or however you want to describe the side of the architecture, did you feel there was a pressure to make the building look sustainable? I mean, was that behind the choice of the timber, or did that just happen?
No, that's a good question, and yes. So we did want it to look sustainable, and we did choose timber because of that. As you notice, we hadn't yet used timber on any of our buildings, and for us it was a challenge as well, and sort of interesting thing to see how we could work with timber. And yes, I mean, with the GSW building, we also wanted it to be, of course, beautiful and sensual and have an aura, but we also wanted it to do that and be, to a degree, didactic about what's happening with all the colours in the west facade, where the warmth is coming and all of that, and you can see the way the people operate the blinds and the inhabitants of that building change the way it looks. Dessau, the inhabitants don't necessarily change how it looks, but it was a very definite decision to try and make those aspects visible. I think it's quite important in terms of general responsibility, the responsibility of architects to take issues of sustainability seriously and then to somehow make them visible and to produce architecture that doesn't look like muesli architecture. Because you can, So I suppose it is a conscious decision. Any other questions? No?
There must be a lot of questions in your brains, but maybe we can ask them when we have a beer.
Fine, yeah.
This is our last question.
By the way, do ask them in German. I do understand German, and I might even answer by mistake in German. So do ask something in German if you want to and you're shy of English.
Otherwise,
no? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, no, this one. One question. Got a question.
Question? Or?
More technical question. Will the aspect of the timber change with time, or is it protected?
No, it's deliberately unprotected and it will change. It'll go more silver grey, hopefully like the Salk Institute, although it's not the same timber.
Okay.